in this project walkthrough, we shall be looking at how to construct a medical application that takes in a doctor's appointment and matches them up with patients and so on. So let's begin. So I have already provisioned a bunch of files, and I have my Angular stuff being stored in bar components. I have my index and so on. So what I will do is I'm going to quickly start up something after finishing up my input stuff here. So I need an input that takes in a text, and this one will store the doctor's first name and let's see, I can store the doctor's second name, and so on. And I'll probably call this ng submit, and in here I'll say add doctor as the potential function to use in this case. We shall also wrap our container using ng controller, and we'll have something perhaps controller as main, and this is how we should scope our functions. We might also need to add a bunch of ng models, so we can call this perhaps first name for doc, in case we later on add patients. And let's finish that. So main dot doc second name, and so on. In some places, second name is the same as the last name. Finally, we shall put in a button, which just has the word add doctor. And let's quickly take a look at what it looks like. There we are. Not so fancy. Let's put in a BR tag here. And yeah, what I'll do is I'll go into my style and perhaps make the container center a bit. So we'll have 0 auto. I'll just use a bunch of margins to make it a bit nicer. Alright, so I can type my first name and last name, and then hit add. But right now it does nothing. When you look at this, there's nothing. It even refreshes, which is what we don't need at the moment. So let's go into our index.html, and the first thing we shall do is we shall, at the top of this file, preferably around here or even here in the body, we can create an ng app module, and then let's call this the medic app. And this bootstraps your Angular application all the way. So let's create a variable, call it medic app, and we'll use Angular's module to get it, medic app, and it takes an empty array. So I do have a bunch of lint problems. To fix that, I'm going to create a touch C file, and what I'll do here is I'll add a bunch of stuff to make sure it's allowed. So we can also use this where we say JSLint white true, global Angular, and so on, and we don't get a weird bug. Let's get rid of this. Wonderful. All right, and the first step is we need to create a controller. So we'll go in here and we'll call our controller main controller, and that takes in a function. so on. And what we shall do is we create a view model and store it like that. And yeah, we do get a bunch of other things that prevent us. If you're into getting worried about linters, this is one way we can Right, so we'll take a look at what else we need here. We need to create an add doctor function that we can then use for submissions, and we can do that like so. For now, it's just a definition, and what will happen is when defined, we shall just alert this works. Okay, when we click that, that works. Awesome. Now we need to be able to extract the first name and last name, and this is what will get stored for your doctor. So you can say first name equals vm dot first doc name, or last name equals vm dot last. Let's make it a little bit more clear. Let's call this last, and let's head over to our index and also change this to last. Wonderful. Now what will happen is we shall perhaps store a list of array of doctors. It's empty. And every time we add a bunch of stuff, we like just push it in there. So we go in here and type array doctors push, and what we should be pushing is an object, and that object has a first name which we'll set to the first one, and a last name which we'll set to the last name. And what we shall do here is we should keep logging. We shall keep logging vm.array doctors, and yeah, let's see what that looks like. So when we say I'm going to our console and type first name, last name, and hit add doctor, we get an object that's returned to us, and when we open it up, we can see that there's a first and last name, which for some reason is not being seen. It's not being seen because, one, we have a typo, so let's fix that. Call it that and that. Alright, so when we add a bunch of doctor names, Victor, and hit submit, we will see that we still have that bug. So with some more debugging, again, I noticed that doc first name wasn't matching what was in the index.html. So after fixing that, we get to see something work. All right, so let's try that. Victor, Trevor, and add that. We look at a bunch of objects here, and so on. We can keep adding as many of them, and you'll notice that there'll be more objects logged at the bottom, same name. Okay. However, we don't want this to stay the same, so we need to like blank it out or get it out of there. So what we shall do is we'll just duplicate this, put that to the top, and we'll give it some default values that will later on reset after use. So let's go here. We'll recopy this, and after successful push, we wipe out the values. Let's try again. See that? So after adding something new, it gets wiped. But notice that I can still add, and it still is able to add something empty. So we don't need to be able to add anything when empty. In fact, what we could do is we could make sure that if the first name is empty or the last name is empty, we just alert the user you can't have empty values, and we only get to push when something is successful. So we'll do that here. And yep, we also log just when something is successful. So let's try that. Let's try adding a doctor. See that? You can have empty values, and yeah, that's wonderful. All right, now we can add a doctor. Can we add a patient? So let's also create a function which is predominantly going to just be a duplicate of the above. Right, just copy and paste at the bottom, and we'll just call this patients. Patient will have a first name, last name, and we'll have an add patient function. So same thing, patient, and we'll push that to array patients. And after that, we wipe it out. So we have patient, and finally this patient here. Okay, and let's log the patients. There we are. Okay, decent. Now let's also hook up our index.html. We will also just duplicate this, put it in the below. So we'll have an HR, separate that, and let's do a bit of editing. Right, so let's call this add patient, and we'll call this patient's first name, patient first name here. We'll go down here, patient's second name. We'll add patient, patient last name as well. All right. Now when we refresh here, we add, say, Mary J, we get an object with Mary J in it. When we try to add an empty patient, we can't have empty values. All right. Now we need to think of a way to match a doctor and a patient. So let's see. We could maybe design a simple matcher. Let's call that match appointments. Right? And I think, we could imagine or suppose that we have a column here, another column here, and this column can be used to show the list of doctors, and then we can later on match them somehow. Okay, so we'll have that div, and let's see, I'll give it the class column 1, and this one we'll give it a class of column 2. Okay, and then we'll just wrap it all up in some kind of container. Okay, so what we'll do here is let's imagine there's another class called calls that contains these things. Alright, so we'll have a list of patients here, and this one we shall just maybe store under that. Patients, and then we'll have a list of for doctors. Okay, and in our style sheet, I suppose we could have call 1 and call 2 all taking a width of 50% of the screen. Okay, and what we'll do is we'll have call 1 floated to the left and call 2 floated to the right. Okay, and just to be safe, we shall prevent we'll see, we'll prevent this from coming down. Okay, step 1 is we shall want to use a way to display this list of patients. So we can say ng repeat patient in main dot array patients, and in here we shall have patient dot first. Let's take a look again at what we called it. So we have first name and last name. So see, we can keep adding a patient and so on. Okay, for some reason the second name isn't being added. Last, yeah, typos will screw you up often. So let's fix that. Last name, and we'll also do that for doctor if it has a typo. Yeah. There. Okay. Something will happen with doctors. Okay, so I can add Mary J, and then I can add a doctor at the top here, say Victor T or R. Okay, so we have doctors on the left, patients on that, and let's design a matchmaker. Now the matchmaker can be designed using some kind of select button. So below this column we can have another break tag here, see that it works. Okay, it does. And let's call this matchmaker. What matchmaker does is it will on the left we'll have a select bar. So this select here can take in a bunch of options, yeah? And we'll see what to add so that it's unique. So an option takes in a value, and this value could be stuff we get from ng repeat. We'll start with patient in main.array patients. The value here would be maybe something like patient first name. Then we'll have the full name here. Okay, so let's go in here, add a bunch of patients. Victor J. We can add another one, Mary Blige Jr. and so on. Notice that this keeps growing. Okay. Now what we'll do is here in the matchmaker, we'll maybe give this one an ID of patient and so on. But let's also perhaps surround this in a form as well. We'll call it ng submit, and we'll call it main.matcher. Okay. Now that that's wrapped up, we'll have to also duplicate this and make one for the doctors. Change this to doctor, last name, and we'll have doctor. Okay, so we'll have that. Call these doctors. And so let's just make sure it works perfectly. So we'll add here Victor M, that doctor, and we'll have Mary J as a patient. So the goal is if we have a drop down list, we can hit match and then these two get matched together. So we'll have a button, we'll call that match. Yeah, it matches the doctor and the nurse. So let's see, let's try to make this a bit unique. Label doctor, this one patients. Okay, awesome. So let's start populating. We'll have Victor J added. Let's add several doctors. Mary Watkins, and so on. All right, and let's have the patient. Just a bunch of patients. Like that. So we can choose them and then match. So ideally if we choose that and then hit match, something should happen, to show that these two were kind of matched with each other. And we have to think about maybe a data structure to store these kinds of matchings. So let's go in here and create another function we'll call it vm.matcher, and matcher's goals are to create a bunch of matches. So this is going to ideally be some array of objects which matches doctors and patients, and it will kind of look something like this. So we'll have maybe doctor name, and blah blah blah, versus patients under the doctor's care, and so on. And these patients are also other objects as well, because patients have first name, last name, etc., etc. Okay, so that's some interesting idea around matching. And we also need to be able to log the values that are selected in here. Yes, I just realized that we have to do something a little bit more complicated, and that complication comes from restructuring our patient model. So we shall have an object that represents the patient, and the patient is, well, we'll have them still modeled as objects with names and an ID for easy looping and separation in case patients have similar names and so on. We'll provide a bunch of IDs. Now, we use a prototype method here that we adjust to this variable here, this patient, and then what we shall store in the view model is an instance of this object, the patient. And the usual drill will still work. So here we'll have an add patient function, which is the trigger from our submit button at the top for the patient. And we extract the first name, last name, do the comparisons like before, and then use the prototypical method, the add patient with ID method here, to pass in the first name and last name, and it does its magic here. So for every new thing that we add, we shall get a nice handy ID. Why? We also have a way of using select statements in a classical Angular approach, and this is what it kind of looks like. So instead of looping like what we're doing here, we can have something work like this. Okay, and let's slowly adjust this so that it uses the patient's array, and yeah, we shall test it and see. Patient, and yeah, hope this works. So selected item is picked from here, and we filter and we extract like the first name and so on. But we do have a full name, so we'll just keep that as name. So there's no need to keep track of stuff. Right now we're storing the name instead of, through this concatenation, instead of first name, last name, we're storing a name. All right, so let's refresh. Let's add. Right, so right now patient live name gets stored here. Let's add another one. Jen Iyer. Here we are. Now what is interesting here is when we inspect the element here, our patient will have a nice ID or value that we can then pick off in a clean way, and this will be very easy for us to later on display what is selected. So let's try that. We can display whatever is selected here, so we'll maybe use this. You have selected, and we'll pass it selected item, which happens to be a name that gets selected. So let's add a patient. So when we go here and we select that, it says we've selected something with a value of 1. Okay. Now that item or that ID that is selected is what we can use to hunt for that item. So for example, that item could ideally be something you pick from, let's see, from main.patient, that array patients, and I believe we can design another method, such patient, and then in here we pass the selected item by its ID. So let's go in here and let's define another method called search patient, and we'll scope it under here. So what happens is here we have patient.prototype.search patient, which takes in an ID, and we'll do our loop. So we'll create a loop, this dot array patients dot length, and we'll keep testing. If we find an item that matches the ID, then we return that. We should return that item. If we don't find that, we shall return maybe a string that says not found. And yeah, let's try that out. So let's see, let's add a patient. So when you select something, you haven't found that, but when you choose that, it shows that yes, we have found an object with that. And what this does is we can do some advanced work with this. Now, I'll give you this code, and let's see how you can continue working or creating a matcher. You can try this approach here, which will probably be a bit harder, but some other hints I'll provide include what you might do in your JavaScript. So in this match function, you need to be able to get the ID of the patient. You need to also be able to get the ID of the doctor, and you need to create a data structure which we had, or which we called vm.matches, and match them up. So what you can do is maybe create something that says this is a doctor with an ID of 1 versus a patient with an ID of say 1, and we have a list of stuff like that, and this way we can know that this doctor has that. You can also create some handy functions, just like the way I've created the search patient. So you can create another function like search doctor, and feel free to adopt this design pattern for the doctors. Good luck.